we don't talk about this because we had visually and physically experienced this, but we had no hard data. Well, in the last 5 years, we've been able to accumulate data. The electronics have gotten to the point where we can easily access data from a lot of different wind turbines all over the place, and we can now develop things like this that we can use as learning tools. And then we can come back to the utilities and say, look, we really can pick up 25, 50% of the load, and this is how we're going to do it. Where before we couldn't. We just said we had a good idea. You know how far that could go.
Do you think putting a tower mount solar panel is a good idea, or would it be better to have it on a structure?
Have it somewhere else. The reason is those towers are designed for a certain load, and they're designed for the load to be up at the top. It's all pre-engineered. And when you start hanging things off of them, then you're changing the physics. And again, remember, who cares on a nice, quiet summer day? Doesn't matter. It's when all of a sudden the winds are gusting from 30 to 60 miles an hour, and all those stress, really weird. I've been on them in 30, 40 mile an hour winds. I didn't stay on them long, I'll tell you that, because they twist and they turn and they move and they do all kinds of weird stuff that you start asking yourself. I was on one once and they blew a quarry across the street, and I had no idea there was a quarry over there. And why would somebody build a tower across the street from the quarry? But they did. And they blew that quarry, and the top of that tower moved 6 feet. And I'm telling you, my life flashed before my eyes. I had it all figured out in my head how I was going to jump off a 100-foot tower and live.
How's that flying lesson? Huh?
Yeah. I was going to write it down, I figured, just like a horse, and roll off at the last minute. Yeah. Well, that's what goes through your mind. This is the first wind turbine I installed. I installed it in Galena, Illinois. I had put one up on my place prior to this, but I hadn't done the work.
Differential?
This is a 10 kW Jacobs.
Yeah, that they put it through a differential.
Yeah. I could spend hours on this. There was two brothers that ran Jacobs Wind Electric, Marcellus and Joe. Joe was the mechanic. Marcellus was the marketer. And Joe, for the first 60 years of the company, designed all the wind turbines, and they were extremely successful. And then in the 60s, they closed the company down because wind business went away. And Joe died somewhere along the line. Marcellus, in 1981, came back and got hooked up with control data and told him, I've always wanted to build this wind turbine. What he didn't tell him is Joe would never let him do it. And so this is what we got. And it's not bad, don't get me wrong. These guys knew their stuff. But it's there's a governor on the front that works off a centrifugal force. So as the speed increases, those blades come out and they turn. But to be able to do that takes a lot of moving parts. Okay? The other thing that Marcellus always wanted to do, and Joe told him never to do, was to go through a gearbox. And so it goes through a hyphoid gear down to an alternator that's down here.
It's mounted this way, so you have thrust bearings on the shaft.
I serviced these for 10 years. I still have my Jacobs t-shirt, okay? But I tell everybody, Jacobs is the Harley Davidson of wind machines. If you don't mind a little noise and working on them all the time, it's a great machine. And the guys that have these, the guys that climb, the guys that service them, they're still running 30 years later.
Yeah, well, the neat thing about that was you didn't have to have a slip ring for the brushes.
Right. That's right. And I'm not putting them down, but there's a lot of guys trying to sell these used, and quite honestly, we're going right behind them and putting burpees on Jake Towers anymore because they just seem to
a lot less moving parts.
Yeah.
somebody's home.
Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture? This is my first house. Well, the first thing that's wrong with that is that's my first wife's ex-husband standing half naked in my front yard. Second thing is, this is a solar house that somebody turned around and put 100 square feet of glass to the north across.
Was he a photographer?
Beautiful valley, absolutely gorgeous valley. The third thing that you can't tell is he sent his wife to the local community college, and she took one course on house wiring and wired the whole house. The third thing is they went bankrupt building the house, and they put in cheap windows and doors. So this thing whistled all winter long. This is, we put that wind turbine across the road over here to offset the $350 utility bills. I love this house. This is a gorgeous place to live. Okay. We got started. I'm going to jump through this stuff because I kind of covered a little bit. When we first got started, didn't know anything about wind. And read a lot of books. We did have flagging in our front yard. That kind of blew me away. But this is one thing. We had absolutely no way to tell where we were in terms of elevation. We were at 1,092 feet, and we were 2 miles away from a road that is right on the edge of the Great Plains, and that's 100 feet higher. We put up a 100-foot wind generator. So we basically stuck our nose out of the hole, is what we did. And we still got really good production, but this is why I emphasize turbulence and all that. I got to watch it right out my front yard on my $30,000 wind turbine going like this all the time. So we had nice loamy soil for the first 3 feet, and then we hit limestone. And I didn't know that either, and all I had to do was go around and look on the other side of the hill, but I hadn't taken any classes on geology. So we had to use dynamite to get the foundation in. These are things you got to watch, okay? The third thing was we didn't ground the turbine correctly. And 3 days after I put that up, we got a thunderstorm, and I blew the inverter right off the wall. And the thing is, they're lightning rods. They get hit every single time. If there's lightning in the area, it's going to hit your wind turbine. You have got to ground them correctly. They need to be grounded to less than 5 ohms, and it needs to be tested. So if you have your wind turbine come out, ask him if he's going to test the ground. Don't tell him why. Don't tell him. If he says, oh, no, we don't do that, get somebody else. Okay, because they have to be grounded. There's a lot of guys that come in, and they'll drive 3 ground rods, and they'll leave. They'll say that's good enough. Well, if you don't test, you don't know. Different soils have different abilities to dissipate electricity. So that's a real important one. That's what I look like. See what wind's done to me? There's the moon boots. That was in my front yard. Okay. That turbine required servicing once a year. Actually, 6 months would be better. If you can imagine what it's like to change oil at 100 feet in the air. Okay, because you're pouring oil, and if you have any kind of wind, it makes that oil airborne. Again, the Jake made my windows thump at night when and this is old technology. This isn't what wind turbines are like today. The inverter, when we were upstairs, we could tell how well the wind was blowing by the sound the inverter would make down in the basement. And it also heated my basement, the first inverter I put on there. I had wood stoves. I didn't need heat. I wanted electricity. They have gotten a whole lot better. Those early inverters were maybe 50% efficient. They're now in the high 90s, and they also don't make near as much noise. So, also got in a whole hoop-da-da with the local utility because they kept taking out my inverter with spikes that were coming across the lines that When you're talking to your utility guy, they're going to worry about all kinds of quality of power on our side. I have never seen a quality power issue out of an inverter, out of renewable energy system. It's always on the other side, which sometimes they don't want to talk about.
So how did you mitigate that?
Oh my God. We got in special equipment. We monitored it.
Like a capacity bank or?
No, they did something on their end. Yeah, I'm sure they put a capacitor bank on theirs. What was happening is I was out in farm country, and everybody around me was milking, and they were all turning on their milking machines at the same time, and it would throw a spike. So, for sure, I don't know. I think you're right. I think they threw capacitors up on the line coming in. I was also a mile from the main grid, so they were running it down, but somehow it was coming my way. Didn't bother anybody else. And this is in 1980, so nobody else had any sophisticated equipment on the grid, or other people who did. So anyway, our bill dropped from $350 to $50 a month. That was great. And the beauty of it is that we were in tune to the environment with this wind machine. Because when the wind would blow, that's when the house would leak. And we could now run around and turn on all the electric heaters because we could watch our meter, and we didn't want our meter to run backwards. We wanted it to do useful things at our home because we got paid a lot better rate if we used it rather than sending it back to the utility company. The other thing, my wife would dry clothes on a windy day. I went down in the basement and I took the element out of the water heater, because water heaters have a 5,000 watt element in them. They want to heat water fast. Well, I don't want to heat water fast if I've got a wind turbine. I want to heat it slow so I can use all that energy over a period of time. So I stuck 1,000 watt in, and I also had 8 kids, so I needed a lot of water. I stuck 1,000 watt elements in there, and I just stuck another old water heater in there, so I had twice the volume of water, and that worked just fine. And that was, what I was trying to do was keep the energy usage in the house and not send it back to the utility. And that's just strategy is what we were using. It did. It provided absolutely incredible entertainment during thunderstorms. Once we got it grounded right, we had a sunroom off the south side of our house. And we put a couch in there. We'd line all the kids, all 7 of them, up on the couch, and because the TV reception was horrible, and we watched the lightning strike the tower, and they ooh and ah. It was funny. Okay, it's great advertisement if you got a business. Everybody, especially back then, we just had lots and lots of people coming to the farm. And quite honestly, it improved our organic farm business, because then we'd sell them chickens and, potatoes and all kinds of stuff. Back then we got lots of publicity. We were the first wind turbine in eastern Iowa, so they had us on TV. I'm no kidding, for 6 months every day on the news. It was like, it's the same picture, of course. We sold the farm and the turbine. One of my neighbors bought the turbine, moved it over one ridge, and ran it for, I don't know, another 5-10 years. Then he sold it, and it went to Ireland. This is a wind turbine that I sold. He originally started out with, he's a Mennonite in Kelowna, and he had a battery system. And somebody here was talking, they were interested in batteries. He had 56 2-volt, 150 amp hour batteries in his basement. Okay, those suckers are that wide, that long, and that high. He had 56 of them lined up down there. And he was using what they call flooded lead acid, which means you got to pour the electrolyte in them. And when you fill them up, when they fill up, they give off hydrogen. And I went down to his basement. I mean, it's an old farmhouse, and I'm like, aren't you a little worried about the hydrogen? And he goes, no, this house leaks bad enough. I won't have any trouble with the hydrogen. And I looked over, and he had a dead cat laying on top of the batteries, and it had stepped on the positive and negative. And so, yeah, glad. I love the guy. I learned more about DC electricity. He was basically the Thomas Edison of Kelowna, Iowa. That he was